Hello everyone. Welcome to Noahide Essential Principles. It's lesson number 7. And before we get into this lesson, we'll just do a quick recap of the last lesson, and that was the Prohibition of Theft, lesson number 6. And in that lesson, we looked at defining the word theft and what actions that relates to in our lives. The prohibition of theft includes the obvious things that we would be aware of, but it also included actions that are perhaps less obvious to us. And for an example, these would be things such as deception and cheating, kidnapping and rape, which is a surprise to a lot of people, false measures and weights, in other words, stating things weigh more than they actually do, laws of employees and employers, and also laws pertaining to injuries and compensation for pain and suffering or loss of income. So that's theft is a very big topic. And in that lesson, we just gave an overview of really what the prohibition of theft is about. And that's so those of you who are new to the Noahide way of life or just starting to learn about it will get, during these 9 lessons, you get an overview of each of the 7 Noahide commandments. By no means are these lessons that I'm giving exhaustive. They don't encompass absolutely every detail, but it is designed to give you a snapshot, so to speak, of what they are. So we will just now continue on, and we ask that Hashem is present during this class and guides us. And so we're going to talk about Ava Minahai, and that means do not eat the limb of a still living animal. Now, meaning the limb, it's just not limited to the actual limb. This refers to flesh, whether it be internal organs, actual flesh from their body or a limb. So this is the last of the Noahide laws that was given. There were 6 given prior to that, starting at the time of Adam. Now, Ava Minahai includes but not limited to, these 3 prohibitions here. And one of them is causing suffering to living creatures, mating different species of animals, and grafting different species of fruit trees. So again, like all the Noahide laws, there are branches attached to each law. So each of the 7 laws are basically a category, and within each category there are other branches that we look at. To understand them and know them fully, it would take much longer than each of these lessons I'm giving. But as I previously stated, it gives us an indication of what the 7 Noahide laws are all about. So looking at a bit of an introduction here, and in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, it states, "And you shall rule over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the sky, and every living thing that moves on the earth." So man was given dominion over all of the creatures. And I'm going to actually read to you now from the Divine Code, the 3rd edition, and I want to just show you that there is some expanded information there. Just get hold of it, just one moment. And on page 239, I just want, when it's chapter 1 in the Divine Code, and I'm just going to read the first statement or the first point. And it says here, Adam, the first man, was granted dominion over all living creatures, as the Torah states in Genesis 1, verse 28, which is what we've just read. Now, this dominion granted to Adam was only for using animals to perform useful tasks, and he was not permitted to kill any creature for food. This is Adam. However, he was permitted to eat from the carcass of an animal that had already died a natural death. Just as Adam was not permitted to kill any creature to eat its flesh, he also was not permitted to cut off a part of it during its lifetime to eat from it. So the Noahide code, the divine code, outlines that. And I'll just put this aside. So we clearly know from the beginning there were laws in place regarding animals, but the actual Noahide law of Ava Minahai, that happened after the flood. So when Noah left the ark, he was actually given permission to eat meat. That is, he could kill an animal for food, for sustenance. But along with that, mankind was not given permission to cause suffering to any living creature. And this is referenced in Genesis chapter 9, verse 2 to 4. And I'm going to read that directly from the Torah, okay? And just so that we get an understanding straight from the Torah what that was. And so chapter 9, verse 2 begins, "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, in everything that moves on earth and in all the flesh of the sea. In your hand they are given." The fish of the sea, I beg your pardon, not the flesh. "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Like the green herbage, I have given you everything. But flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat." So there we have a very clear understanding straight from the from Hashem, when it says, "But flesh with its soul or blood," that means it's a still living thing. And the life is referred to the soul and the blood. So there was a clear understanding made about that. Now, so Noah was forbidden to eat the flesh removed from a live animal, as is stated, as we've just read. And again, I repeat, "But flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat." So, and this is an absolute, eternal and universal commandment for all mankind. That's Jews and Gentiles alike, everybody. And this is actually the seventh Noahide commandment. And this is where we get the name Noahide laws. As we've previously talked about in other lessons, 6 of these laws existed prior to the Great Flood. But this is the 7th law that was given, and that is the law of Ava Minahai. And that is where we adopt the name Noahide laws. Now, the prohibition of Ava Minahai, it applies to domestic mammals, wild mammals, and birds. Now, there is a passage here from Leviticus, and we'll read that. And that's Leviticus chapter 11, verses 29 to 30. And I'm going to read that. Although I've got that up there for you, I want to read this from the Torah because there are a couple of footnotes, explanatory notes in the Torah about this, which is probably important for us to read. And so this verse says here, these are the contaminated ones to you among the teeming animals that teem upon the earth. The Kholed, the Akbar, and the Tzu, according to its kind, the Anakar, the Koak, and the Letar, and the Comet, and the Tinshims. Now, we're going to read from the Torah commentary about what are these contaminated ones, because these words we probably have no idea what those animals are. So I'm just going to read here, and it talks about it says from verses 29 on, the small creeping animals. This passage lists the 8 small animals that are contaminated when they are dead and which convey their contamination to people and objects. Since not all of their identities are clear, we transliterate them, but give the possible translations in this commentary. And so the Kholed, according to Rashi and others, this is a weasel, or it could translate to a mole. The Akbar, it is generally agreed that this is a mouse, and it may include other rodents as well as a rat. The Tzu, Rashi noted that this animal resembles a frog, that it is presumably a toad. And I'm sure if there are any Australian viewers, they'll know how disgusting the cane toads are in Australia. You just would not want to eat one. The Anakar. Now, this is the hedgehog or a porcupine, and this is according to Rashi. But according to the Radak, it is a viper. Either way, you wouldn't really want to eat any of them. The Koak, this is a species of lizard. The letter, Rashi translates this as a lizard. The comet, the snail, or a chameleon, according to Rashi, Radak. The Timshims, this is not the bird of the same name in verse 18. According to Rashi, it is a mole, but according to Sadiah, it's a type of lizard. So you can see that there are some, it gives you some indication in, I guess, our times, what those animals might be. So I just thought it was interesting. And if any of you have a copy of the Torah or the Tanakh, you may find some comments in there about them. But I thought sometimes we read these names and we sort of don't really know what they relate to. So that gives you a broad understanding of what these animals, creatures are here. Now, the prohibition of Noahide does not apply to fish, to mollusks, and insect-like creatures. However, if you were so desiring to eat them, it would be better to kill them first if possible. Now, I won't go into what comes under the category of fish and mollusks and insect-like creatures. Most of you would probably know those. So these are a couple of interesting things here. This is in this is slide number 10. Now look, it says here, sea mammals, example whales and dolphins, etc. So that's sea mammals, are not included in the prohibition because they are considered to be fish-like animals. Mammals that dwell both on land and in the sea are included in this prohibition of Ava Minahi. So I guess a good example for this would be the sea turtle. What else? No. Would it be a sea turtle? Because they lay eggs, don't they? Perhaps you better not take my advice on that. No, I'll leave that. Just ignore that comment. A Gentile is liable for a capital sin only for eating Ava Minahi meat from mammals, but not from birds. Now, I just want to qualify this here because I actually had a question about this a few weeks ago in relation to something totally different. And I had to go and, clearly look into this bit. Now, according to this, for a Gentile we're talking about Gentiles, if you were to eat a little bird whole, that is, put it in your mouth and swallow it whole, I could not think that anyone would want to do that, that is not considered Ava Minahi. However, if you place the head of the bird in your mouth and bite the head off and start chewing and eating that way, that is considered Ava Minahi. I'm sure there wouldn't be too many people that are in the habit of eating whole birds. They'd have to be young ones. I can't imagine the feathers. Now, Gentiles throughout the Western world would know that there are designated standards of humane treatment of animals, including the slaughter of animals and fowl for human consumption. So here we're relating to, look, I know in Australia we have the RSPCA and animal rights organisations. Australia is very well represented, as would be a lot of countries, in relation to kindness and humane treatment of animals. And also we people who have to buy their meat through the supermarket or their local butcher, then the process of that meat before it gets to you in the butcher shop or supermarket, there are very strict guidelines as to how that animal is slaughtered, and they have inspectors there, they have people in charge of checking that it is done in a correct and humane way, whether that be animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, whatever. And then, of course, also people who, the industry of fowls, chickens, chooks. So to answer, some people, Noahides will particularly be concerned about the meat they're eating. Has it been slaughtered in a humane and acceptable manner by law? And we can assure you, again, I know in Australia that the guidelines are very strict. So if you're buying your lamb chops or your steak from your supermarket or butcher, you can be assured that that has been killed in an appropriate manner that does not cause pain and suffering. Now, for Jews, of course, they have their laws of kosher slaughtered clean animals, which is not, we won't go into today. That's not part of the purpose of these lessons. However, for Gentiles, just to put your mind at rest, there are laws. I don't know, each country has its own set of laws. So if you live in a different country to Australia, you might want to look into them. But I know some Gentiles will actually purchase the kosher slaughtered meat. That's a decision up to you. It's not necessary. Bear in mind that kosher slaughtered meat is extremely expensive, and you can understand why. Right. Now, we're going to talk about restricting pain and suffering to living creatures. Well, on behalf of the human, on our part, mankind, first of all, we have a responsibility to animals and our environment. So, you know, we're the higher order of the created beings, so it is our responsibility to see that things are done correctly. We would all agree that we care for our pets and other animals that are in our care or possession. That includes things like providing food, shelter, kindness. We maintain their health. Now, that could mean regular grooming for dogs, cats, and certain animals, or even cattle are brushed and, have their hooves manicured, and they're treated like pampered pooches sometimes. Worming, etc. Animals have parasites that they pick up, so they have to have regular worming. And, certainly if they're sick, they've got to be seen by a veterinarian or a suitably learned person. And they may have to have regular checkups depending on their age, or like humans, they can have underlying sicknesses and illnesses, might require medications, and certainly they have some immunisations that they may or may not require throughout the year, depending on the country you live on. And I think most people who own a pet, I'm talking about your most common ones, your birds, dog, cat, most of them end up, as we would say, fur babies. They often have more rights than the human being in the house. I know mine do. I'm a bit like their slave, I think, but anyway. We do it because we love them. Now, this is another question that came up not long ago in a discussion, not at all about the Noahide commandments, but we're talking about ridding ourselves of pests when they're a threat or encroach on our property or in our home. And I'm talking here general sense of rodents, rats and mice. They can overnight be a plague and cause all sorts of destruction. Cockroaches are another, in the summertime, we all go into meltdown when we see a cockroach. And in Australia, we have something called dingoes, which are wild dogs, and they can actually be quite devastating pests to people who have young lambs or cattle who have had young calves in the calving and lambing season. 2 or 3 dingoes can go in and decimate the young, and they become, they have to be controlled. So we are allowed we're not expected to allow rodents and pests and things such as wild dogs to interfere with our life, safety, or income. So we do have permission to perform also, and this is often a topic that we see on the news, but mankind does have permission to perform authentic tests, that is scientific experiments on animals for the benefit of possible use for humans. That's a jet flying over. We're not far from Amberley Air Base. You'll probably hear it through the microphone. So there are often reasons why this is, we wouldn't certainly be experimenting on a human, but many a great vaccine or cure or medication to control something is first tested on certain laboratory animals to see what the benefits or the side effects are. And according to Torah, that is acceptable, because after all, animals are also for the benefit of man. So just want to clear that up. People do get a little bit confused about that. But certainly when it's to benefit the health and well-being of man, it's permitted. Now, this is another question that comes up quite often amongst some people, and it is about hunting animals. Now, you are permitted to hunt animals for your food, for your own food, or perhaps to provide food for your carnivorous pets, for instance, your pet cats and working dogs and pet dogs, etc. So that is permitted. You are permitted to hunt the appropriate animals for feeding your other pets, or to provide food for yourself. So I know some people hunt deer and they say that it's beautiful, roasted, etc. So it is permissible for you to do that. There's no problem there. However, hunting animals for the pure sport, just destroying an animal and leaving it for no purpose other than just to shoot it, that is forbidden, or kill it in some way. Along with that also, there are certain sports, and this wouldn't be an exhaustive list. I know in modern times people invent sports, but certainly bullfighting, dog or cockfighting is forbidden. And you do see some, particularly the dog fights, you see some terribly sad cases where dogs are rescued somehow from those fighting pits, and very kind people usually try to rehouse them or adopt them, and it's just terrible to think that people can get joy out of watching a dog or even a rooster being torn apart. This doesn't say much for the character of the people. Now, here's another interesting one that often has a lot of confusion between what Gentiles and Jews are allowed to do. I'm pertaining to what Gentiles are allowed to do, and this is in the manner of castrating or neutering animals. So it says that we are permitted to neuter or castrate either female or male animals in order to facilitate the use of the animal for man. Now, the examples I've given here are probably two of the most common, and people can relate to this. So, example, gelding a horse. Now, that means it's a male horse with all its appendages, and you're not going to keep it for a breeder, nor do you want to. It's going to cause havoc, and often stallions are quite, can be difficult to manage. So, you are permitted to castrate that stallion or male horse, and that's what you call then a gelding. And that they are much quieter and docile, and people prefer that. Or you can neuter it, for example, a female cat. I'm sure we've all heard the story of a little pet cat stray that comes along, and everyone's the next thing you got 8 or 10 kittens. So these are just two common examples that I'm sure everyone can relate to. People are neuter their dogs too for obvious reasons. So the process of the neutering or the castration, it has to be done in a humane way. Certainly that's not going to cause pain or suffering. Obviously most of these things would be done by a qualified veterinarian in your area. So it is acceptable for Gentiles to castrate and neuter animals to make the benefits to man more acceptable, safer, or in some cases the benefits to the animal as well. So there's no need to have confusion about that. Some people do have concerns that they're not allowed to castrate their animals or neuter them, but we can. Now, getting on now to our environmental. Again, this is a brief snapshot of what the laws entail. But again, I have tried to concentrate on things that stick out as applicable to to Noahides. So there is a prohibition of mating different species of animals here. And this comes, you can read this in Genesis chapter 1, verses 21 to 25, and also in Leviticus chapter 19:19. And I am going to read that in case some of you don't have access to a, what was the first one? Genesis 1. Fingers aren't working properly today. Here we go. So this is Genesis 1, verses 21 to 25, and I'll read it. It says, this incidentally takes place on the fifth day of creation. And God created the great sea giants and every living being that creeps, with which the waters teemed after their kinds, and all winged fowl of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, but the fowl shall increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. God said, this is on the sixth day, let the earth bring forth living creatures, each according to its kind. I'll just repeat that. Let the earth bring forth living creatures, each according to its kind, animal and creeping being, and beast of the land, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, and the animal according to its kind, and every creeping being of the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So we keep hearing that repeated, of its kind and of its kind. So this is where the basis of this prohibition comes from. And then, just continuing on, I'll go to Leviticus 19:19. In Leviticus chapter 9, verse 19, it says here, and this is relating to forbidden mixtures. You shall observe my decree. You shall not mate your animal to another species. You shall not plant your field with mixed seed. And a garment that is a mixture of combined fibers shall not come upon you. Now, that is that prohibition of wearing wool and linen. That actually applies to Jews, so just don't get confused about that one. So we agree then that we have a fairly broad understanding of the specifics of not tampering with creation the way Hashem created it. And this universal prohibition of cross-mating animals of two different species, this is considered, so if you were to persist and go against God's commandments and cross-mate different species of animals, that is considered to be making changes to the original order of the divine creation of God. So that is why these laws are prohibited. And so everything in the Noahide laws, everything in God's laws, in the Torah, have a reason. And once we understand that, we can absorb that and say, okay, now I know why. So it is important that we understand and we read these references instead of me just reading saying you're permitted to do this or you're prohibited against doing this. You need to go back and read these things and look at them. Now, we also have a prohibition of grafting different trees. Now, I've said before, I'm no great. I have a garden, but I'm never call myself a gardener. I don't think I'd even try grafting anything. But for the same reason we talked about with the species of animals, this also applies to nature, fruit trees. But the prohibition is of grafting different species of fruit trees, and we'll give the classic example here. Grafting a shoot from a species of fruit tree onto another species of fruit tree, such as an apple tree, grafting a shoot from an apple tree on to an orange tree. That's forbidden. That is seen as interfering with the laws of Hashem's creation. So we don't do that. Now, however, you do, this is Gentiles, we do have permission to graft a shoot from a fruit-bearing tree onto a non-fruit-bearing tree. So you could take the shoot from the apple tree and graft it onto a tree that doesn't bear any fruit. Now that fruit means not just juicy fruits as we know them, but, you know, nut trees and things like that. That produce nuts, that's fruit. So it would have to go, and why you would do that, I don't know. I can't see there being any purpose really, but anyway. And also you have permission to graft a fruit-bearing vine onto a non-fruit-bearing vine. So in the area where I live, most vines bear fruit. And why, I'm just trying to think, why would you take let's say a grapevine, which a lot of people have growing in their yards, especially in Australia. What sort of a non-fruit bearing vine would you graft it to, and what would be the purpose? I don't know. As I said, I'm not skilled in great gardening skills, but I guess those of you who are proficient gardeners would have a reason. Now, again, according for Gentiles, the prohibition of cross-grafting is in relation to species of fruit trees. So let's just not get confused about this. For there are many laws and prohibitions for Jews, but we're relating to Gentiles. So the prohibition for a Gentile about cross-grafting is in relation to the species of fruit trees. There is no prohibition of bringing two fruit trees together. Now, I'll explain this when I've finished reading it. Provided they are not actually grafted one to another by human intervention. So, okay, let's just say you go to your nursery and you think, I want an apple tree and I want an orange tree. You know, I'm going to make preserved fruits and have wonderful dreams about these things. And just let's say you just got home and you dug one hole and thought, oh, look, that'll do. I'm going to stick them both in there together, and, you know, I haven't got the energy to dig another hole. That's okay, meaning you brought them together, but you did not actually graft one to the other by human intervention. So, and we all know to make a graft, you have to actually make a cut and bind them up. I know people who graft their rose bushes. You know, you see them splicing. It's a very technical, sterile sort of procedure. It's a bit like microsurgery, I think. So, you know, if you planted those trees close together, even in the one hole, for the sake of convenience, that's not considered grafting. So I just wanted to make that clear for you, so I don't leave you with any misunderstanding. So that brings us to the end of the prohibition of Ava Noahide. Again, it's a brief snapshot, but it just gives you an indication of some of the things it covers. Not all of them have we covered in this lesson, but it enables you, I guess my purpose in this lesson was to demystify this term Ava Noahide, because people think, oh, what not eat the limb. Oh, you know, most people are repulsed by the thought, but there's a lot more to that other than just taking flesh from a living animal and eating it and causing it suffering. You can see it spreads into things such as looking after our environment and other prohibitions or permissions, etc. So I hope this has shed some light for you all on Ava Minahai, the prohibition of eating the limb of a still living animal. And of course, we must always be responsible for caring for the animals that are placed under our protection, and seeing that because they're God's creatures. And you know, animals have a nephesh. They have animals have a soul. So we can't ignore that. So we have to be kind to them. So I would just say, let us focus on all the things we do to be for Hashem and His divine will. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.